Well, it's an absolute pleasure, Jator. Welcome to the Deep Life Podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it very much.
I am so very grateful for our dear friend, Allison, who introduced us, because I feel, even though we've known you for a short amount of time, we've been following you on Instagram, and you really seem to live a deep life, always looking for questions, how you can improve and truly step into the sovereign being that you are and that we all are. So I'm very much looking forward to this conversation. But, as you've grown, I'm sure you didn't start off this way. Maybe you did. But I'd love for you to give our listeners who aren't as familiar with you, who you are, and, an understanding of, how you got to this point in your life.
Yeah, for sure. Well, my name is Jator Pierre. That's who I think I am. I think I'm still also figuring out who I am. It's been a journey to that place. And maybe I figured out a lot of who I am not and still finding who I am. So I'll tell you a bunch of stories about my past. I grew up in a household that was a little esoteric. So in some regard, I think this has become a natural outgrowth of my childhood and my parents and my experiences of them. So I don't feel as celebratory of that path because I didn't carve it on my own. It was pre-carved. So there's an interesting dilemma there. And then studying at the Czech Institute for years, I was very curious, looking at why certain clients were still stuck and or not meeting their performance goals or their aesthetic goals, or pain wasn't leaving their body or injuries weren't healing. And I had a degree in kinesiology and a degree in nutrition and the Czech Institute and lots of other aspects that I applied to that. And yet I was still finding these places with clients, and I thought it was really interesting, as well as places with myself that I didn't understand. And one of the ways I learned best is through experience. And at the time, JP Sears was working at the Czech Institute, and JP embodied what I aspired to be as a coach, diving into mental and emotional realms and kind of understanding what was going on behind the curtain. And as I started to work with JP, that sprouted a very close friendship and a deep dive of the last 15 years into psychology and what's going on behind the curtain. And once JP's trajectory took off in another direction, I started to work with his mentor, who is also one of my mentors, a guy named John McMullen, who I experience often to be one of the wisest people I've met on the planet. And I studied with him for the last 12 or 15 years as well. And I've probably done 6,000 hours of coaching with him.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that has informed my perspective today. And so I have a deep background in functional medicine and nutrition and movement and check level 4, yada, yada. But what speaks to me most is what's going on in our heart, what's going on in our minds, what's going on with us emotionally, and what's going on from a thought process perspective. And I became extremely curious, and it became a hobby to search behind the curtain and to find a deeper understanding for myself, mostly for myself.
Yes.
The beauty is I get to do for a living, what I really enjoy. And I think an even greater beauty for me is I get paid to learn about myself. The illusion is often, the clients are there to learn from me. I think that's partly true. the truth for me is clients shine lights on themselves in areas that I maybe haven't seen in myself or haven't looked in myself. And it continually offers me a place of reflection and self-understanding and self-growth. And I love it. So that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, and I love that too. It's funny that you say that with the coaching, because when we began, Dan and I, Momentum, and I started coaching with our clients about 3 years ago, I was not that I'm evolved to the point where I'm know everything right now, but at the beginning, the clients that were coming to us, oh man, were they really for me as opposed to me coaching them? Because I was getting so triggered, especially with nutrition, because that's what I do, particularly in our coaching. And I was getting so frustrated. And then one day I was reading something basically saying that the universe is giving you these clients to show you where your shadow work needs to be done and in the light. And as soon as I understood that, though, it was almost like a weight was lifted off my shoulders, because I felt like I was doing a disservice to these people who are paying us to help them. But in turn, they were really teaching me what I needed to work on myself so that I could show up for our other clients in a much better way. Because if I'm becoming a better version of myself, then I'm able to help them in a much better way.
Yeah.
But I'm still learning. I feel that too. We're still learning through this whole process.
I'm still learning too.
Yeah. And that's the beauty of it.
I hope that never ends. And I think in to draft off some of what you shared, I think it's, from a coaching perspective, at least for me, many coaches that I've experienced, especially in the beginning and maybe all the way through their careers, base their self-worth of their coaching in terms of how much a client changes or how much they perceive a client to change. And the stickiness of that is, as a coach, if you get your ego needs met based on how your clients change, then your agenda is driven for your needs, not for theirs.
Wow.
And
yeah.
That's a really important point for me, is finding a place in coaching where you can get your ego needs met that isn't dependent on the client. And so the way that I feed my ego needs around my clients is finding aspects of myself that I see in my clients so that I can find my own work, rather than needing to turn my clients into me and needing my clients to change so I can get validation that I'm a worthy coach. It's a really slippery slope in my experience in the coaching world. And I guess some part of me thought it was important to give voice to that here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's so much carryover to people, even who aren't coaches, just to go about their life in that way. Or everybody you're meeting is a mirror reflecting back to you things that you can change about yourself, and places where you probably are repressing things or hiding parts of yourself that you don't care about or love in the same way that you love other parts of yourself. So I think that's definitely a great lesson for everybody.
Yeah, myself included. Thank you.
But I think there's something what you said before really resonated as far as like working with clients, and well, I'm sure a lot of them were probably getting great results. And then you had some that for whatever reason weren't getting the same results. How has your coaching kind of evolved from where you were then, as probably a lot more physical and focusing on the movement? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but to now, where has your curiosity brought you into, like, how do you work with people now?
It's a great question. I think historically, when I first started, and not first started, but maybe up until about 12 years ago, most people were coming to me because of my practitioner background or my functional medicine background. And my perspective has shifted in the sense that it became obvious to me, and of course, I'm biased toward my own perspectives. It became obvious to me that the body the organs and glands, food, sleep, movement, breath, is all secondary to how you perceive yourself and how you perceive you deserve to be treated, how you deserve to be treated by yourself, and therefore how the situations and places and people and things that you put yourself around. And so that became my focus, because downstream work is cool and there's no criticism toward that. I did that for years and years and years and years, and I became much more fascinated as to what was upstream, what was driving people's behavior, what was the trauma or the wounding or the separation that was informing how they perceive today, and how was their perception of today informed by the past, and how the past plays such an enormous role in how we experience ourselves, how we experience each other, what we project onto others, and how we still choose to live. I'd say less so consciously, but more so from a subconscious agenda. One of the extremely interesting paradoxes that I've bumped into is our ego parts are desperate for familiarity and control. Because of that familiarity and control, what's interesting is that we will often play out actions in our life, thoughts, words, deeds, actions, emotions, that are facilitative or remind us of how we felt at some point in the past.
Mm-hmm.
So if someone says, I want to lose body fat, but they don't, for whatever reason is, that failure often comes with a sense of fear or a sense of shame. And the interesting thing is often that is what the client is looking for, is the familiarity of fear and or shame to confirm what's going on subconsciously in their everyday life. And that fascinates me to no end. So how that's then evolved in terms of my coaching is, how do you navigate into those places with people where there is a lot of fear and shame, mm-hmm. without creating more fear and shame? And that is a skill that, at least in my opinion, takes a tremendous amount of time to hone when you're using silk gloves and soft hands, and when you're not. A saying that I subscribe to today still is, part of my job is to comfort the disturbed and to disturb the comforted.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
I do too.
Yeah,
but I think that's where I'm at today, and that seems to be the majority of my work.
Yeah. Do you find it that it's so fascinating to me too, that, you know, we as a society, and especially myself, I mean, I was addicted to my comfortable lifestyle that I lived for, 30 plus years. And I think for myself, as much as I know that change is good, it's often scary. Do you find it that people have such an adversity to change because they haven't been the person who they're aiming to become, and that's fearful for themselves? Because I think that I'm almost going through that right now, where I feel like I'm in this like holding space of, Dan and I left our very comfortable life in Los Angeles of very familiar lifestyle of 8 or 9 years, to now we're in this in between space of, in Massachusetts with my family right now, in a crap storm of stuff that's gone on in the couple months. But as much as I'm envisioning our future and what we want to build, it's very unknown. And I'm allowing myself to surrender it, which is hard in and of itself because I'm such a control freak, which I think a lot of people are, but that's just a fear of the unknown. But I also have to know I've come to this point because I'm ready for it, but I'm also not ready for it in the same sense. It's hard to describe. Do you feel
like you kind of said before, like you've never been the person that you need to be yet. So it's scary to try and become that?
Yes. Even though I know it's coming, I'm still really scared and I have resistance, but I'm trying to meet that resistance with a lot of love because I know that it's just protecting me.
Yeah, well said. As I was hearing you speak, what's really interesting is if you watch this podcast, you'll watch yourself say I. And I'd invite all of us, inclusive of myself, especially when we're talking about challenges, to use a different language, to use a language of a part of me.
Oh,
there's a part of me that feels ... And there's another part of me that feels ... What you're doing with that is you're acknowledging that there's conflict. You're also acknowledging that there's different parts of you that have different perspectives and different needs. You're also taking time to acknowledge that there's this conscious agenda that you have, the what I want. There's also a subconscious agenda, which is typically a greater one. What I want that I don't know that I want, and that's what keeps showing up in my life.
Yes.
And
oh my God.
And so you have this, these ego parts going on inside of you, and I do too. And we're all control freaks. So let's just get clear on that. Whoever doesn't think they're a control freak is a control freak by not thinking they're control freaks. So that's fun. And to consider the shift from what you were doing to what you want to do, it will come with fear. It will come with fear of the unknown, as both of you said. It'll also come with fear and or shame, which is really interesting, of leaving the past story. So how do you leave the past story? Through acknowledgement and connection, and through reverence for that story got you to where you needed to be for a certain amount of time so that you could survive very well in this world, so that you could look back and say, I've done that enough and I want to do it in a different way and I want to start to thrive. That's a very tricky space to be in, especially from an ego's agenda perspective, because as we're changing, people often notice the literal change. I moved from LA and now I'm in Massachusetts. That's literal. There's a metaphor or a symbolism in that too. What that represents to both of you is a lot more than the literal. If I painted a picture, if I showed you a picture of you two moving from LA to Massachusetts in a picture, and we sat down and I said, what does that picture represent to you? You both have so much more information that would come out of that.
Yes.
And that information is super important because we want to be able to acknowledge what that represents. And we also want to be able to acknowledge that parts of us feel or have an emotional experience of something else than what we want. It's scary, it's frightening, it's shattering of my life and my perspective and my stories and my direction. Those parts have to be coddled and connected with. And by continuing using the word I, what you're actually doing is you're pushing, at least from my perspective, you're pushing those parts of you away.
Wow. Yes.
So, I'm in Massachusetts and it's scary AF. And wow, you know what? I'm going to sit down and I'm going to let my little girl feel scared. And I'm just going to feel it. I'm not going to talk it. I'm just going to sit in a chair and I'm going to let myself and every cell feel scared and acknowledge that fear. You know, from my perspective, our greatest fear as human beings is intimacy. Feeling your fear and allowing the space to do that is extremely intimate with yourself.
Yeah.
And we all, as a general theme, want to run from it through talking or moving or exercising or creating all the literal stories about whatever's going on. That's all deflection.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. I'll just find myself like washing dishes that don't need to be washed because I'm in my childhood home, and you hit the nail on the head for sure. It's hard. Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah. I mean, you said you're in your childhood home, which is extra cool because it's extremely challenging for us to go into an environment and not slip into the associations of the environment.
Right.
And so you might notice yourself in this environment often feeling much more like a little girl than a woman.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. When everything happened with Dan and I, deciding to move back to Massachusetts, he made this wonderful point because I met it with resistance at first. And he was like, this is a little bit of your hero's journey. Like I needed to leave, this home that I grew up in for 18 years when I left for college. And then I moved, across the country, and I hadn't lived here for so long. And I identified a lot with who I became outside of the family that I grew up in. And I felt like I found myself in a different aspect because, almost like you said at the beginning of the podcast, I'm not going the traditional route that the majority of my family is going, and I pride myself in that I just am able to step out of that. But now I'm coming back full circle into this, I would say, beautiful realization of, all right, can I be the person who I was back in LA and San Francisco and all the other places that I lived in here in my childhood home? Because exactly like you're saying, I do revert back to a lot of things that I did as a little girl. And I know that, but I feel like I'm also able to be the parent that I needed at the time. And I find myself sitting there or sitting with her at all stages of life, because as much as I resisted it, it's like, wow, I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful for this. Not many people can say that they're able to move back into the home that they lived in as a child and go through experiences that are very, very challenging, but rewarding in the same sense as I integrate those aspects now that I'm older and I can transmute as much as I can in the situations that arise. It's easier said than done. And I'm learning new things each and every day. Don't get me wrong. But the fear has come full force, I think, for the both of us. But I think that that's a great leeway into kind of fear in general.
Yeah.
I'm afraid.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah. Like fear, the more that I think about these kind of topics and these different sort of like distortions that we have, it kind of seems to me that they all stem from fear in one way or another. I'm curious if you kind of recognize the same thing, or if you see the same thing or not, or.
Yeah. I would agree. In my experience of myself and working with clients, fear is definitely a driver. I think as a general theme, often in our world, I'm saying that we're in very similar worlds. There's also a fear of fear and a shaming of fear. And often there's a lot of sharing without recognizing that there is a light and a shadow side to fear. And that fear is necessary, and it's informative and can be useful and can also be growth-based. It's not all bad or irrelevant or shouldn't be around. You can look at that simply from a evolutionary perspective. We needed that to survive.
Right.
When fear, I think, takes over our lives and we're moving from a place of chronic fear and inhibiting ourselves from experiencing maybe new things or new places or new people or new aspects of self, I think that fear then can be pretty detrimental to us as human beings. But again, it's really important to me to bring balance to these conversations, because fear is also useful. It teaches you a lot about yourself and can be used as another mirror to learn about, well, what, again, back to the picture, what does this represent to me? Or what part of me is afraid of this? Because it's probably not all of you. It's probably some aspect of you that's feeling a sense of fear. To explore your own, our own fear of fear. What if all of the negative talk about fear is actually expressing how afraid we are of our own fear? And what if that drives it deeper rather than alleviates it? What if a more powerful or a different path would be, how do I become friends with my fear? How do I learn to understand my fear? How do I connect with a part of me that's afraid? And as our friend said, reparent myself in a different way and help myself move in a different way. Those are all things that I think would be really important from a fear perspective. And fear is one of the drivers that I'm familiar with. The other driver is shame. As far as I'm aware, we are the only animals on the planet that have the capacity to blush.
Oh, that's interesting.
It's a shame response.
Oh, okay.
And what's really interesting about shame and fear is that as a general theme-ish, many adults allow themselves to, well, actually, I'll take that back. Not many. Some adults allow themselves to express their fear. Many adults express their hidden fear and shame through anger.
Ooh.
Anger is a deflection from fear and shame. Okay, so that's super interesting. We'll get back to that maybe. So more people are willing to feel fear. More people are willing to express fear. Many people hide their fear using anger. And deeper than that, though, from my perspective, is shame. And we're ashamed of our shame. And it hides, hidden shame deeply hides inside of us in a very interesting way when we're children. When we have shaming experiences, because of our mindset as children, we often don't experience shame without self-identification. So shame becomes more than I feel ashamed. Shame becomes I am shame. I am ashamed of who I am. At that moment, you have no choice but to start wearing masks and to start hiding, to start pretending, and to start, living life in an inauthentic way.
Yes, covering up your true self. Yeah.
You have to, because at that point you believe that you yourself are unworthy. So you have to create masks of worthiness. And the very interesting paradox to that is that doesn't always look like the A student. That can also look like the F student.
Yeah.
It's two sides of the same coin. The expressions are on opposite sides of that polarity, but they're still expressing a mask to hide. And there's a really interesting book. I think it's interesting. Healing the Shame That Binds Us by John Bradshaw. He writes a lot of really good books, by the way. In his research, whether it's wrong or right, I'd imagine based on my experience of myself, it's probably pretty close. Most of us, by the time we're 7, have experienced 25,000 hours of shame.
That many, wow.
That's a lot of exploration to do.
Oh man, yeah.
To reparent those parts.
Yeah. Okay. That I will say that makes me feel a little bit better that I haven't tackled every single thing yet. So okay.
I'd invite us all to consider this path that we're walking in our own ways does not have a finish line.
Yeah. Definitely not. Yeah, it just keeps going.
And what like for me, I think that there's a lot of beauty in that it keeps going.
Yeah.
And an interesting perspective to consider as we're exploring ourselves and in self-discovery and with curiosity, if we notice a sense of why am I not complete? Why am I not at the finish line yet? How much more work do I need to do? This is so heavy. No, that's all subtle language saying that the work that you're doing is coming from a fear and shame place. Mm-hmm. It's not coming from discovery and curiosity and imagination about how amazing it is that we get to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And almost, I don't want to say start over, but give yourself the opportunity to change in ways that you didn't think were possible because of the conditioning that perhaps you grew up in whatever environment that may be.
Mm-hmm. Well said.
Yeah. I'm excited. I feel like I haven't dug into shame enough now. I'm kind of excited.
Yeah, same. We were focusing on this fear more.
Do you think it's shame? I don't even know if you can answer this, but I guess in your opinion, is shame separate than like a fear of people knowing the truth about you?
Well, or, that's so they're kind of two sides of a coin, right? Fear is, at least in my experience, the fear of being found out, right? There's also the shame of they won't like me when they know me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. So they ride to. They're like ride or die chicks. They come together.
Yeah. Okay.
Hand in hand.
Hand in hand. Yeah. And the reason why I shared the piece about fear, typically being a little bit more palatable for people. Is because then it speaks to how deeply shame can hide. And very few people have the language to say, I feel a sense of shame. Mm. People are ashamed to say that.
Yeah.
And you have, a group of people on the planet that will express fear. Let's say they're here. You have a group of people that will express anger. Let's say they're here. And then you have a group of people down here that'll express a sense of shame, which is much, 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 much smaller group. And my experience is the ones who move from anger to fear and then get into the root of shame, they have very, 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 very big dissolvements and changes in their perspective on themselves. And they are extremely comfortable representing their healthy limits and boundaries. They're extremely comfortable saying no. They're extremely comfortable showing up to Thanksgiving with their own food.
Yeah.
A fun one. They become extremely comfortable with more of their authentic self because, at least in my opinion, they're not wearing as much masks to hide. And they've maybe reached a point in some regard that they recognize through the reduction of how much, let's just say, toxic shame or self-identified shame. With the reduction of that, they know it's okay for other people to have their opinions of who they experience them to be. Thank you for sharing who you experience me to be. Great.
Yeah.
They become very crystal clear on who they experience themselves to be. And that is very powerful. And in a very strange way, in my opinion, once we get to that stage, then that itself can become another place we hide. So what does that mean?
Yeah.
The place that we hide of, that's your projection, that isn't who I am, is hiding. Can you bring curiosity to others' people's projections and explore how much of their projections are true for you? And get curious about their projections rather than deflect from their projections, I think would be the next level underneath that, to really find yourself, because people ultimately, in some regard, can see aspects of you that you can't see.
Yeah, and that's what we were saying earlier. Everybody's a mirror, and reflect back to you who you are, especially the parts that maybe you're hiding or you feel shame around.
Agreed.
And I think what you're saying before also brings up a really interesting kind of like paradox, where most people are wearing these masks because there's shame around, like, well, if they knew the truth, they wouldn't love me. And then they wear this mask, but the mask is really just manipulation. And if people love the mask, then they don't really love you. So you're, rather than facing the risk of people knowing who you are and choosing not to love you, you are wearing a mask where they truly can't love you. So you're gonna, in the end, like, receive less love if you're wearing all these masks and you're not truly expressing who you are.
Very well said. I'll shorten that up in terrible English. You're fucked.
Yeah, that's one way to put it.
Yeah.
I mean, at some point, when we look back historically at ourselves, we get to ask ourselves the question, like, there's a saying that I still subscribe to, which is, you know your future. We all know our future. We know our future because our future will be a repetition of our past unless we have conscious intervention.
Ooh, yeah.
And so if you are not consciously intervening, well, keep hiding, and you know where that story will go. You've been down that road many times. That is also familiar and comes with a deep sense of control. So then the invitation to say, I'm going to start representing myself and do this differently and take off some masks slowly and expose more of who I really am on the inside, and more of my real thoughts and my real emotions and my real perspectives, is frightening. It's deathly frightening. Imagine if you were both in your hometown. You are actually in your hometown. Imagine if you were in your hometown and you were in a tower in your hometown, and you were at the top of the tower. The top of the tower has glass windows all the way around, so you can see everything from that tower. And we look at our tower and I know that shop and I know that street and I know that business and I know that school, and everything is as it should be. It's very familiar. It's very safe. It's very comforting. It's very comfortable, even if it's uncomfortably comfortable. And then I said, okay, well, we're looking out this tower. This is your town. This is where everybody you know lives, where we grew up. And I'm just going to start taking buildings away and streets away. And I'm going to take the whole town away. And I'm going to take all of your associations and your self-identifications with that away. That is really scary. And it's also shaming. So if we can have compassion for what we're really doing is excavating whole entire cities out of ourselves, then we can say, well, I might want to do this slowly, and it's okay if it moves slowly. I don't have to take all my masks off at once. I'm going to take one off this year and see how that is, and ease into the process and maybe have a little bit more grace with it, and more joy and more fun and more playfulness with it, rather than turning it into another place that we feel like we need to perform to get external validation from someone.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great example, though, the analogy that you said with the
tower.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. That's amazing.
Yeah. Like you said before, like there's no finish line. So if you're racing to take off all the masks at once, like for what? You enjoy the process, right? Like take one off.
What's the mask of the race? Like, where did you learn that it has to be this speedy agenda, and who are you competing and comparing with that you think you need to change so fast? And where do you think you'll be when this change happens? Like what I'm always fascinated about is people create these stories of, when I change, this will be what I'm like. And look, there is consequences to change, and there's benefits to change. And there's consequences to staying the same. And there's benefits to staying the same. The grass is not greener. You simply grow maybe more grace with what shows up in life by taking that path, and more understanding and more compassion and more reverence for yourself and others. But it's not like you're going to win a prize, and it's not like you're going to be skipping on, I don't know, lily pads and running around with unicorns all day. Like, shit is real out here. We're in the literal realm and on Earth. Shit's gonna get real.
Yeah, there's a lot to learn here in the school of Earth that we're in. And yes, absolutely.
Let's keep our feet on the ground a little bit.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's so funny that you bring up the masks, because I am a part of me is, dismantling all those. I remember, gosh, we're coming up on 2 years where one of my girlfriends did an archetype reading for me. And it's basically 4 cards. I don't want to tell the whole story, but the first card that you pull is what you need to release most. And it was the mask card for myself. And that hit me so hard, because I didn't realize that, in my fear and my shame throughout my entire life, I had built all these masks of who I was, and dismantling them, as I'm still doing it this day. And like you said, it will be a forever journey. And I'm so grateful for that, because as I uncover and dismantle these masks, I'm realizing that I have masks on that I didn't even know I put on. And that's with anyone and everyone. And I also am so grateful to have that awareness within myself, because I can observe that in others. And I say observe it in the most loving way, because I am not going to lie. I do still have judgmental patterns within me. I think that we all do. That's a mask that I'm, trying to dissolve. But instead of being judgmental through the people that I know, whether that be family, friends, coworkers, clients, anybody who I meet, it's interesting that the people who I'm closest with, I can see how they interact with a certain person and then how they're different with other people. And it's like, oh, okay, I see how they've built masks up themselves. And it gives me a level of empathy towards them as well, that we're all in this together. We're all trying our very best.
I love it. Can I say something about judgments?
Yes, please.
My invitation to, and a reminder to myself as well. What if you didn't judge your judgments?
Ooh. Yeah, because we're always taught like judging is wrong, judging. Yeah. Yes, tell me more.
Well, I'm a big fan of becoming friends with myself, not enemies with myself.
Sure. Yeah.
And if there's a part of me, I get to say there's a part of me that's judgmental. Yeah. And I think, the paradox to judgment that I don't hear many people talk about is judging somebody good is just as painful as judging somebody bad. They're both judgments.
Touche.
So what if we can, play with not judging our judgments or becoming friends with the part of us that judges, and, accept our humanness. Like for me, there's often this, I'll say, an over spiritualization of this process, like that you're going to get to a place of you are everything and nothing, which may be true, and maybe a part of this. Maybe that's the observer in us, or maybe that's the spirit in us, or maybe that's the soul, whatever you want to frame that as. But you also get to be human, and you get to have emotion and thought and judgment and joy and pleasure and rage and anger and fear and shame and elation and dopamine and cortisol and adrenaline. And excuse my English, but why the fuck would you be here and not want to dive into all that too?
Yeah. That's beautiful. Thank you for bringing that up, because I think that in this journey, I should just speak for myself personally, I do get caught up in that very much. Like, oh, I shouldn't, like, I'm trying to work through this pain. I need to combat it, or this fear. And it's like, you're right. We're all having this human experience, and it's beautiful regardless. And embracing that is, I often forget. I really do. I often forget. So I'm so grateful for the reminder.
It'd be like, the question I asked myself, because when I first started a lot of this, I would say in hindsight, I became robotic in the sense that I walk outside and all my windows in my car are broken and all my tires are flat. Everything is purposeful.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a truth. And I'm also allowed to have my feelings about it and to process that and to be annoyed about it. And I get to have both. And if it's true that we're gifted with this human experience, and that's not some just other control story that we make up to feel more sense of control down here on this planet, because I don't know any story that doesn't come with a sense of control, however grand or how little it is. Why would I not enjoy my humanness too?
Yeah.
If I get to be spirit, great. I will do that when I die.
Yeah.
In the meantime, I'm going to really enjoy my humanness too.
Yes.
You don't have to, they're to me, they're not separate. They're together. And I don't think the design team would make them work against each other. I think we make them work against each other.
Yeah. We
get to embrace both.
I keep thinking of, Jesus said, to be in this world, but not of it. I love that way of like looking at life, where it's like, we're here to be here, to enjoy every bit, like wring the life out of it. But then you can also know that you are more than this too. And that when when you die, you're going to go on, and this isn't everything. You're a spirit, but while you're here, enjoy that. Really, really wring the emotions out of it and feel everything.
Good old JC dropping wisdom as usual.
You knew a thing or two.
Just a few things. There's a lot of wisdom in religion. My experience, there's tons of wisdom in there if you look at it like you just did for me, with metaphor and curiosity, and I've religious proverbs have helped me through a lot of times. And as I've looked at a lot of religious writings and proverbs, it's fascinating to me that I think psychology actually stole a lot of religious concepts and just reframed them and repackaged them in a different way and made it maybe more palatable to those that are anti-religion. But there's a lot of beauty in religion, so I share that perspective.
Yeah, another quote that I keep thinking of is that success leaves clues, and like these teachings have been around for thousands of years. Probably not because they don't help people. Like they're there because they worked and because people found value in them. So like whatever you want to think, I don't consider myself, like I was raised Catholic. I don't practice or follow any of it, but I love to like read the teachings of Jesus. Just I love to read like what the Buddha said and Lao Tzu and all these great spiritual teachers. There's so much wisdom everywhere.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. 100%. And I think what I get really curious about, as you were saying that, is what if it's the person that's reading that finds the wisdom, not the wisdom itself in the pages?
Ooh, that's really deep. That's very interesting. I was gonna say, because there are some quotes that resonate with me so much, and there are others that don't. And that literally read my mind. And that's pretty amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's actually like brings up like intuition, which I think I know is something you've talked a lot about and work with in your coaching. But I think we have, like, a lot of people really struggle to know when to trust their intuition or
even identify.
Yeah, or know the difference between intuition and ego, maybe, or some of these phrases. Just what is ego and what is intuition, I think gets so convoluted and confusing for a lot of people. Okay.
Yeah, it's convoluted and confusing for me too, but I share my opinion.
That's all we can ask.
So my experience of intuition and why there's a lack of trust in it is back to what we were chatting about in childhood. In childhood, many of us experienced a shaming of our imagination, of mystery, of our curiosity, and of our openness. And we were often, taught to confine ourselves and taught to not trust ourselves. So we're wearing, think about the moment of when some part of you subconsciously decided to start wearing masks. That is actually extremely traumatic.
Yes.
People often look for overt trauma, like, physical abuse or car accident or someone getting beat, etc. The overt stuff is easy to find and easy to see, and it's often why we focus so deeply on it. I think the more subtle is when we started to mask, we actually were leaving a part of self. And at that moment, we lost trust with our internal world and started to look for trust or validation outside of us, and then became extremely needy for that breast milk rather than the original one that we have for us. And so intuition, as I understand it and experience it, is beyond our ego's understanding and agenda. It's not confined by our ego. It's not even confined maybe by our senses. It doesn't come in through the same pathway. It simply comes in. And I've often shared with myself, often because I need this lesson too. And I'll share it with you all in your audience. Like, there is a moment when something occurs in your life and you know. You don't know how you know. You don't know why you know. You simply know. But that moment is usually squeaking. It's like super, 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 super quiet. So if that's true and that those moments are that quiet, then take the average adult and look at how much noise they have in the sense of distraction.
Right.
This is one of the gifts of meditation or meditation practices, however you do that, is it helps to still you enough so that you can start to hear that. And even in that very still space, if you still feel if you still feel a sense of shame or fear that hasn't been processed or reparented to allow that in, it will still be very hard for you to receive. Because intuition, as I understand it, is so outside of the ego and comes through in this other way, it's frightening to your ego. Your ego cannot control it. And another interesting thing as I experience intuition is as soon as you speak intuitive hits, it's already distorted. It can't be spoken.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
As soon as
I just got chilled. I did. Oh my God.
It can't be spoken. It's for you. Yes. And as soon as you open your mouth and start putting framework of words, and beautiful. And that's rationalization and creating story and all that. Like it's a sensation.
Yes.
Maybe intuition could be expressed in paintings or music, but the literal word will never house it. And as soon as you start to speak the literal word, all of your senses are joining in to create the story. And all of us are living an extremely hypnotized world experience because our senses are essentially designed to cut out information so that we can survive.
Right. Wow. It's beautiful that you said that. And I do feel my intuition heightening, especially over the past, I would say, year. And it's very hard to pinpoint. It's almost like you're trying to label something that's not supposed to be labeled. And you're absolutely right about the meditation, whether that be a silent meditation, or even if you do guided meditations or breathwork meditations, whatever that may be, it's just allowing that space for different downloads to come in where you're able to quiet your mind and resolve or absolve or kind of dissolve whatever may be coming in, all of those thoughts that, that monkey brain that's always happening. And the deeper I go into meditation, as long as I can hold it, I try to at certain points, depending on the day. And it's funny, I'll get intuitive downloads either right before I fall asleep at night or in the middle of a mundane task. Like I was saying, almost washing dishes. They don't come to me in like a voice as like a guide or anything. It's just, I'll come up with these one-liners that is just my intuition. I'll say it to Dan and he's like, where'd you hear that from? And I was like, no, it's just, it's me. It came to me. Or just, it's funny. It's with a couple unfortunate tragedies that have happened over the past couple months. One of them that happened in the depth of my soul, I just knew it wasn't good. And it's so hard for me, because that had never happened to me before. And I was trying to label it as whether it be good or bad, the situation. And as it came through, and I just knew in my heart, it was that, I don't want to say a sixth sense, because I'm, again, labeling that intuition, but having it come, and then the validation of it actually happening is like, okay, so it happened. It happened. And it was my intuition that was, I don't know if it was forewarning me. Actually, that would be an interesting question for you. Almost like a forewarning of it, or just almost like accept it as it's happening. That's actually interesting. See, maybe it's my intuition telling me I need to look at that deeper. But now I'm questioning.
I experience intuition, at least where I'm aware of it, I think, is mainly in my coaching sessions.
Okay.
And so often in coaching sessions, and when I say often, I'd say almost every one, I will, my client will be talking or sharing something, and something will pop in, 5 years old, dad, and I'll wait for the client, and then I'll ask, can I, invite this in? Are you open to hearing? And I'll say, well, what occurred when you were 5 years old with your dad? There hasn't been once that hasn't sparked a tremendous opening. And when that first started to happen, I noticed my own shame and or fear about using that process. I invited a lot of courage in to start to do it. And now in my practice, it happens every time, and I do it every time. And I think the other piece around intuition, too, that's important in this context as well with my clients is that, let's say 5 years old and dad comes up with a client, and I share that with the client, and they say, well, nothing at 5, but at 6 years old, ... It's still an intuitive hit. We're creating a story that is linear, that my intuition is going to express in like this exact science that matches.
Right.
And so one way someone can start to get a little bit more comfortable with their intuition outside of doing shadow work and inner child work and the rest is you can get a coin, get like a quarter. Quarter. Get a quarter and sit down, quiet space, settle up, flip the quarter, and while the quarter's in the air, call it heads or tails. Then when it lands, slam your hand down on top of the quarter. Don't look if it's head or tails. Just pick up the quarter, flip it again, heads or tails, tails. Cover the quarter. Don't look at it. You're not looking for confirmation from some quarter that your intuition is right. You're looking to hear what comes up.
Wow, I love that. We're doing that later.
Yeah,
that's amazing. I love that. That's
because
really
part of the ego salivation will be, I got to look at every one, and I didn't get it right. So my intuition is terrible. And that's not the point. The point is to hear what comes up when you do it. And then that can start to help you, hearing it. And it's a skill. You've got to relearn how to hear ourselves again.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, it's funny because in childhood, definitely for myself, you're brought up, majority of people, to put in someone else's hands to make you feel a certain way or to validate you or to receive answers because you are untrusting of your own self. And I'm certainly in the trenches of that.
Well said.
Right now.
It's, I mean, we're kids, we're needy, we're dependent, and we tend to own this perspective. I think because of how our brain is wired at that time, that it's because of us. We don't understand the separation yet. And so we make stories that about what happens to us, our fault, and then we become ashamed of ourselves. And imagine, well, I can share a story from my childhood. I must have been 7. And my mom and I went to go see the Sigourney Weaver Aliens movie, which was effing scary, man, when I was 7 years old. And at the time, my mom and I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment, and I lived in the living room. So I'm on the couch in the living room going to sleep, and I was desperately frightened. For a couple of weeks, I slept with my lights on. But before that couple of weeks, the first night, I walked down to my mom's room, down the hallway in the dark, very scared. Got to my mom's room. I was like, Mom, like, there's an alien in my closet. I'm super scared. And she sat up in bed and said, there's no such thing as aliens. You're wrong. Go back to bed.
Oh, wow.
That is enough for me to discount my own thoughts, my own feelings, my own experiences. And that's nothing toward my mom. She didn't know how to manage that situation in the way that I would manage that situation.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But the opportunity there as a parent could be, you sit up in bed and you look at your child and you say, wow, there's aliens in your closet. That's cool. Are you afraid? Yeah. Okay. That's okay. It's okay to be afraid. What if I come with you and go make friends and see if these aliens are our friends? What if I walk down there with you and go check it out with you? There's just a different way to do that. That's acknowledging of the child's imagination and perspective and thoughts that helps to grow that continually so that they get to wear less masks. We're all going to wear them. They get to wear less.
Wow. Beautifully said. And thank you for sharing that. Mm-hmm. And thank you for making me feel like I'm not the crazy person, because I was deathly, like, I just started rewatching scary movies because, like you, I was like 7, 8. My mom was having me watch like Psycho. She like loved Alfred Hitchcock. And I'm like, I can't ever shower alone anymore. Thank you. So that makes me feel, again, just as, experiencing these lovely human aspects. Jator, do you have any other questions?
No, I think, yeah.
I mean, I'm blown away. I could listen to the depth of wisdom in your experiences, really, that you still go through today, just shining a light on everything. It's so beautiful. We cannot thank you enough for being vulnerable and really sharing your truth, and what you have found has helped you and your clients, because in turn it's helping Dan and I, and we've got so much that we can take out of this conversation, and we know our listeners will too. So we thank you for that. But if people do want to follow you or get in touch with you, where can people do that? And I do think you have a little something to offer some of our audience here. So we want you to dive into that.
Yeah, let's start with the offer, because we need to put food on the table.
The funnest aspect.
Well, the offer is free, so it's a masterclass on instinct or intuition.
Oh, as we were just looking at that, how the universe worked out with that. Perfect. That's super really cool. Exciting, and thank you for that.
It's an hour-long video-ish, a PDF with a lot of exploratory questions and an audio. So we put a lot of time and effort into that, and wanted to give that to our community and to share it with yours, which I don't know who we are. I guess it's the parts of me. Very grateful for the opportunity.
That's fabulous.
And then I'm on Instagram, which is at Jator Pierre, and Facebook, Explore Jator, and personal page is Jator Pierre. And my website is explorewithjator.com.
Fabulous.
Yeah, we'll link all those.
We'll link everything in the show notes.
Awesome.
Thank you again, Jator, for this amazing, deep conversation.
Thanks for having me. It's super special for me. Thank you.